Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.
BASF. We create chemistry.
Boa tarde, good afternoon, welcome, bem-vindos e bem-vindas. We are here and I'm going to speak in Portuguese, in English, sorry, because today we have an international agenda. Yeah, I am Ornella, I'm responsible here for open innovation at ONONO, which is our digital and scientific experience center for BASF in South America. We are broadcasting live through our ONONO Plus platform, and we have a great live audience in order to share more about future insights and what Future Hacker brings us as news, and our cherry on top to have Roger Spitz here launching his book. So we are very proud of having this opportunity here. And we are going to have an interactive session. So the idea is that you will be able to interact with the audience, with our keynote speakers during the whole session through different ways that we are going to explain how. But specifically for those who are connected online, you can pose your questions through the chat all the time, and then we are going to put this later and here as well, right? So with no further comments, I'm going to call Andre, that is going to do the opening and share a little bit more on what Future Hacker is. So, Andre, thank you very much.
Hi the people online, olá todo mundo aqui. Queria agradecer a presença de todos aqui. Como já vai ter dois textos, de tudo vai ser em inglês, então vou ser a parte em português que eu vou falar um pouquinho aqui, tá? Que acho que vai ser legal. Vamos lá, o Future Hacker, ele, não sei se todos conhecem, mas ele começou, na verdade nós somos os filhos da pandemia, né? Na verdade ele nasceu com essa frase, né? Primeira frase, quem é que está criando o futuro? Foi aquelas inquietações, aquele momento de olhar para o céu e falar assim, meu, como é que a gente não consegue prever uma pandemia? Como é que tantos estudos, etc., e a gente é surpreso do que está acontecendo no mundo. Então foi a partir daí que a gente começou a pensar, né? Daí eu comecei a elucubrar, falei, pô, quem são as pessoas que estão criando o futuro? Em todas as áreas. Não necessariamente só os futuristas, mas assim, na medicina, na parte da parte do direito, de todas as disciplinas. E essa provocação ficou batendo, martelando na minha cabeça, até que falei assim, vamos começar a falar com pessoas que teoricamente estão nos bastidores do futuro, criando esse caminho, hackeando efetivamente o futuro. E quais também os dilemas, né? E aí foi quando a gente começou a jornada, né? Foi uma jornada que, depois de um mês, eu já trouxe a Maria, puxei e falei assim, Maria, tem uma entrevista amanhã em inglês com um cara que chama Albert the Grey, um cara super polêmico, e você faz? E ela falou, amanhã? Eu falei, amanhã. Aí ela fez, encarou, e efetivamente entrou nessa jornada com a gente. Então assim, a gente falou com centenas de pessoas, milhares de assuntos, e aí até a gente chegou agora, depois de 4 anos, eu estou falando rápido porque me deram 5 slides e 5 minutos para falar, então vou ter que correr aqui. Depois de 4 anos, a gente chegou em alguns statements, né? O que a gente acredita? Então, em primeiro lugar, assim, o futuro é muito além dos buzzwords, do que a gente está vendo. Isso é uma coisa que a gente percebeu. Existe um oceano de informação, de conteúdo, que vão além do Web 3.0, vão além do metaverso, e vão além sei lá, do blockchain. Tem muito mais coisa. E aí foi exatamente isso, foi um statement que a gente, depois desses 4 anos, a gente percebeu. A outra, a inovação tem que ser democratizada. Aí quando eu falo isso, não é só para a base, para conselhos de empresa. Então ela tem que passar por todo mundo. O terceiro, os caminhos não são lineares, né, e óbvios. E esse acho que é um dos mais importantes. Tudo está conectado. Tudo está conectado. Então é muito difícil a gente falar de um tema e desassociar de outras coisas. Então esse nosso grande objetivo foi exatamente a gente tentar eliminar o ruído, criar match the dots, a gente juntar as pecinhas e também a gente pensar no futuro mais humano, colaborativo, integrado. E aí o que a gente fez, né? Na verdade, como é que a gente fez essas conexões? A gente criou, eu acredito que um dos maiores grupos globais de gente envolvidos em projetos de futuro. A gente já está são mais de 40 nacionalidades, mais de 300 experts. Queria agradecer aqui, cadê o Roger? O Roger foi um dos primeiros Future Hackers nossos e que assim, acreditou desde o início tudo e que deu pra gente muito suporte. e mais de 150 setores. E hoje a gente é ouvido de mais de 110 países, por várias plataformas, temos parceria com o Terra, também estamos aí na parte de TV, etc. Mas acho que o mais importante é uma startup que nasceu de uma forma diferente, né? Normalmente você tem um produto e cria uma comunidade. Aqui é meio disruptivo, de largada. É uma comunidade que está dando vertente para produto, né? Uma coisa bem diferente. Qual é o perfil demográfico? Não existe. É psicográfico. Qual é o perfil do público do Future Hacker? É curioso, é isso. É gente que está querendo ver as coisas novas para frente. Não tem classe social, não tem nada disso. É apenas pessoas que estão efetivamente com projetos assim que queiram conhecer o novo. Então, assim, a partir disso, né, dessas pessoas, desse expert, etc., a gente criou uma jornada a partir de dilemas e fricções do mercado de inovação, que aí eu vou passar para o Duda para completar aqui.
Boa tarde, pessoal. Boa tarde. Está desligado? Bom, obrigado pela presença de todo mundo aqui. Como o André falou, a gente vai falar um pouco sobre inovação, disrupção. Mas quando a gente fala de inovação, basicamente a inovação não é só ter boas ideias ou grandes ideias, mas é como navegar pelos desafios que essas ideias trazem para as organizações, para as pessoas, para as nossas vidas. Então, mais do que olhar a inovação como grandes ideias, é como a gente navega, por exemplo, só para dar alguns exemplos aqui, na quantidade de informações que a gente recebe hoje no dia a dia, tecnologia sendo avançando, o baixo letramento em relação à inovação, em relação à tecnologia, como isso tudo nos afeta, né? Então nós no Future Hacker, nós acreditamos que em 4 pilares que ajudam as pessoas e as organizações a navegarem pelas inovações, né? Então o primeiro pilar é o discover, ou seja, fazer as descobertas, descobrir, olhar as tendências, né? Conectar ecossistema, conectar pessoas. Isso que a gente está fazendo aqui, né? Quando a gente faz esse tipo de evento, a gente está trazendo pessoas para se conectarem. Tanto aqui como online, enfim, as pessoas se conectarem, os ecossistemas se conversarem. Spread, que é comunicar, falar e engajar as pessoas, porque a inovação, ela enclausulada, ela não serve para nada, ela precisa ser aberta, ela precisa ser democrática, como o André falou. E por final, sempre, né, quando a gente fala de inovação, ela precisa ser medida, né? A inovação ela não é simplesmente uma arte ou uma coisa que se faz porque é legal ou porque, enfim, é uma necessidade e ela precisa ser medida. O resultado dessa inovação, o que está acontecendo, né? E hoje a gente vai ter a oportunidade de, dentro dessa jornada, a gente vai navegar por algumas das experiências ou dos serviços ou das formas como a gente tem para entregar essa inovação, esse conhecimento. Um deles é o Horizons, que é o nosso reporte, né, que baseado nas entrevistas, as informações que a gente tem em primeira mão e que a gente compartilha trazendo tendências não óbvias, né? Então é mais do que um relatório de tendências, ele é uma ferramenta para o futuro, uma ferramenta para que as empresas e pessoas consigam se preparar para o futuro. Mas isso eu vou deixar para a Maria, ela vai falar com mais detalhe, mais propriedade, vai ser uma apresentação só disso, então vai ser bem bacana. Uma outra coisa, nós vamos ter também a oportunidade aqui de viver um round table, uma mesa de discussão. Roger, a Ornella, a Maria, enfim, discutindo inovação, futuro, disrupção e como isso se encaixa na nossa vida, nas nossas vidas pessoais, nossas vidas profissionais, né? E eu quero fazer agora também um convite, porque aqui também, como a Ornella falou, isso aqui vai ser interativo. Então a gente preparou uma surpresa aqui, que é o AI Book, é uma ferramenta, uma plataforma que a gente tem, de inteligência artificial, que captura, a gente acredita muito nisso, na sabedoria coletiva, né? Como fazer isso? Então, eu vou explicar, mas basicamente é uma cocriação de todos vocês e todas as pessoas que estão online aqui, eu já vou explicar como, de colocar esses insights, esses conteúdos, e para que, após o evento, isso consiga ser compartilhado, consiga ser relido, relembrado, né? Quem nunca foi num evento e depois de falar, pô, esse evento foi fantástico, mas o que ele falou mesmo? Assim, vamos... Aí a primeira pessoa que te pergunta, você fala 3 coisas que vem na cabeça e o resto, a sensação de FOMO, a sensação de que perdeu alguma coisa é muito grande. Então, essa consciência coletiva é uma forma, o AI Book, ele captura essa consciência coletiva. Então, aqui vem um convite para vocês. Primeiro, se vocês apontarem, abrir a câmera do celular e apontar para esse QR Code, vou dar um tempinho, sair da frente, vocês vão ser direcionados para o WhatsApp do Future Hacker. Na verdade, é a inteligência artificial gerenciando já esse WhatsApp. Bom, uma vez que vocês entrem aí, está funcionando o link? Tudo certo? Beleza. Uma vez que vocês entrem, o pessoal do online também pode entrar e fazer isso, porque qualquer um consegue participar de qualquer lugar. A partir daí, os insights, fotos, texto, áudio que vocês queiram compartilhar sobre o evento, eles vão começarão a ser coletados aqui dentro da plataforma, e isso tudo vai gerar um e-book que a gente vai co-criado com vocês. Então, todos nós aqui, quem participar, na verdade, vai ser coautor desse livro, e esse livro vai chegar para vocês no final, depois do evento, tá bom? Então, não deixe aí de participar, e isso vai ser bastante legal, vocês vão ver que é uma experiência muito legal, muito bacana. Só um disclaimer aqui, os dados pessoais são deletados depois, o conteúdo é utilizado para este evento aqui, tá bom? Então, as informações e os insights, eles são compartilhados de forma anônima, então não se preocupem com isso. E é isso, gente. Então, fica aqui o convite, espero que vocês gostem. So I'm going to switch to English, because our next session will be in English with Maria Taide. Maria Taide is the partner of Future Hacker, so she will tell us more about the Future Hacker Horizons, which is a great product, but I'm a little bit biased in this view. So Maria, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Duda. Thank you, everyone. So you see that it's good that we started in Portuguese. Now it's going to be the good Brazilian English, right? And then we can finally go to real English with Roger here, right, Roger? That's diversity, can I say that? So thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. Before I begin, I see there are some people standing. Anyone here would like to sit down? No? You have a chance? Are you good? Okay, cool. So here's the thing. Horizons, these insights or report, or whichever name we're still deciding to give it, it's a long, extensive report. It's around, I think, 50 pages, right? So today I'm just giving you guys a quick peek, because I know everybody's here is dying to listen to our friend here, Roger. I surely am. So this is just a sneak peek. But what I would like to say is that if anybody here is interested in hearing more, exchanging ideas, we love doing that, right? So just reach out, please. Duda already said that it's a creation of 2,000 minutes of content of around 4 years, and it was a very hard job to choose what is relevant, and that's the most difficulty that we all have in our daily life. There's so much information out there, right? So what should we pick? But the thing is that we're actually talking to people that are there making the future today, working involved, and founders and CEOs, entrepreneurs, even young hackers involved. So that's how we chose. We're actually seeing what people are actually doing today, because the future is now. What we have to do today to have a more inclusive and sustainable future, right? So the very first part, which is one of my personal favorites one, and I know a couple of people here in the audience as well, right, is regarding the biodiversity economy. And why did we choose this name? Because I think that we all learned by now that having a human-centered future is no longer working. And we know that. And the thing is that we understand why we've been using this term, because when we talk about technology, we want our future to be human, thinking about technology. We don't want robots in the future or anything like that. But here's the thing, making it human-centered, we already know the impact in our environment, in nature, in other species. We did interview Cecilia Tan, and she likes using this term interspecies economy, right, Duda? Which is the relationship between us and all the species, right? So what the message that we want to give here, that is way beyond us, but everything around us, and how we can, finally make it sustainable for everybody. Why way beyond recycling? Because recycling is not enough. We have to go from the very scratch and how we are actually developing our products. Which type of materials are we using? Because when it's there, we already have the waste, is already too late, right? Let's go from the very beginning of the cycle and see how we can start by doing it right. And why way beyond carbon credits? Carbon credit is important today, and we know that. What we're living today, we need it. But it's not enough to keep working as we are currently working today, to then at the end, just buy some carbon credits, right? So that's not enough. So now the words, what are the words that are there? Is becoming carbon negative, is giving back, is circular economy, is regenerative economy, right? Shared economy. Like for this new generation out there, it's not that much of a big deal owning things, owning cars, having I don't know how many houses. We're past that, right? Also, material science is going to become even more increasingly important when we are talking about how we are making things, how we are building things, what type of products we are building from, right? The dilemmas, and we have so many, right? So from having regulations to safeguard us, and we need them, but how we can compete with countries that have nothing in place, and they're doing everything by all costs, by all means. How are we competing? How are the powers going to be measured in the future, right? It's about being able to innovate and be inclusive and be ethical. Is being able to have an educational system that is going to prepare us for that. Because we all know here as well how outdated we are when it comes to teaching our children, and when it comes to even teaching our leaders, teaching inside the companies, like the models. We should be able to inspire and to have a safe place for people to question, to be creative, to make errors, and that's how we can innovate, right? So there's so much work to do since the very beginning, from scratch. Regarding inclusion and sustainability, and customized diversity is also something that is not very usual to hear. But here's the thing. We know that the future is going to be more customized, more personalized, but on the same time, we need to have the public acceptance of that. Today, we already struggle with discussions around gender equality and all the different types of gender that we currently have. Imagine that in the future, I don't know how many avatars we're going to have, and how many types of humans when we become even transhumans, when we have all the technology and all the biohacking going on. There's so many different types of people that on the same time they want to be different, they want to be recognized. How we are doing that? And how is the legislation going to have a protection around that as well, right? So the big question here is a sustainable and inclusive future for some or for all, right? And here I have to go really quick here, but it's basically the observation of nature, biomimicry. That was a new term for me. I don't know if it's for you guys as well. But it comes, and I think you're going to remember this guy. And Roger, pardon my French, you can correct me, Lavoisier. Yes? He used to say, and that I have to say in Portuguese, that's how I memorized from my school back days. But na natureza, nada se cria, nada se perde, tudo se transforma. You guys remember that, right? So that's old, right? But this is going to be increasingly important. That's, just observing the nature and using technology innovation, using nature as an inspiration to evolve. So this phrase from Alessandra Lalujo, she's one of our future hackers, is waste is a design flaw, is exactly in line with our friend Lavoisier. And here's just some examples of how technology has been using nature as an example to evolve. Medicine is a big part, and actually the end of Horizons, we did have a lot of demand from the health industry. Health industry is a big innovation and tech player, and also a big example of how they're using nature to inspire and to have more solutions that are actually not so much invasive, and how the body can actually start absorbing and being less toxic to us. So co-creating the future, right? The power of collaboration and diversity. And that's actually our NDA, right? So we can't really innovate. And I'm sure Ornella can really talk about that way better than I, right? It's an innovation hub without having diversity, without being connected to the whole ecosystem, without having a safe space for people to exchange ideas. And there's only one point here that is very important, and we've been learning here, especially here in Brazil. We're not so good of searching and connecting with ecosystems abroad. And guys, we need to be better at that, right? It's just, we have to stop going to the events with a whole bunch of Brazilian groups and everybody staying together and being shy about connecting to others, because we are everywhere. We have amazing stories here in Brazil as well, but we have to bring also other countries here to Brazil. I see Onella is laughing here, you can't see her, but a lot to learn, but we have also many, many opportunities as well. And to be able to see not only what's happening abroad, but especially in different sectors. That's something that we are used as well, right? Like if we worked in a specific sector, we go to see benchmarks still within that. But things that are happening in different areas, they can completely transform our businesses. So it's important to keep looking also to other places. This part, as much as I love, I'm going to have to say really quickly, but we know that technology can connect, but on the same time, there's this risk of a really big loneliness epidemic. It's really easy for people to be looking at others and seeing fake realities and not really understanding like how it's hard to have a deeper connection with people and with our friends. And there's this movement called self-compassion. We actually released a roundtable about it last week, so you guys can check our website. That is exactly how self-compassion, mindfulness, kindness, common humanity can actually help us having not only a more inclusive future, but also focus on our mental health as well. I love this phrase. Mariana Baer is also one of our future hackers, the roundtable with her and Barbara Best. This piece here, guess who was our exclusive interview with? So the author is here, so I'm going to skip that. That's exactly what we are talking today here. But what I really love about Roger is that it's way beyond ideas and way beyond, trends and thoughts, but he actually is able to give us practical tools and practical guides. Okay, so as a company, as a person, what do I have to do? Like, how can I get informed? What tools do I have? So Roger, I'm skipping that, okay? The war on truth. This is also super important. I interviewed a Harvard professor, Rawi Abdellah. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong, but this guy is amazing research about him. And actually, one of the main threats of the future is if we think it's hard today to identify those scams and what's wrong and which information is fake or not, this for sure is going to get worse. It's going to get really hard to understand. We heard already about this case in Asia, which they did this video call, and the finance director, he transferred this huge amount of money after this video call, and nobody on the call was real. It was a scam, right? So this is getting harder. And we need to understand that we need to start getting, searching for answers and searching for safeguards mechanisms right away. And it's not about, we can't just leave it to the IT department, right? This is about digital literacy, media education, not only, and when I say about media education, it's not just about our children, right? This is about, like, in our own companies, in our families, you know, is this never-ending fight that I have with my mom to stop clicking on email links, and this is, it won't stop, right? But seriously, like, this is one topic that needs to be from the board of directors to, you know, the very beginning, the very base of the companies and schools, right? Well, that part of innovation on health, again, that was a specific demand that we got. Usually, companies ask us, oh, now we wanted, you know, horizons about energy, about the food sector, so we usually, you know, do it. The main point here is more that when we think that, you know, just searching for a solution about our health in Google is, you know, not making the doctor's life easy, put this in another level when we put AI on it, right? And when we upload our exams to GPT, right? Now think about it when we have access to all the data and to all the wearables and we know everything about ourselves. How is this going to change how we deal with the doctors and we deal with the health insurances? How is the economics going to work? So this for sure is an industry that is worth taking some time to study as well. I'm running here. 5 minutes still, okay? Okay, so the power of immersive realities, and this is something that also is going to affect, you know, all sectors. And I think I have a really optimistic view here because it's not only about giving access to people. And if I say that, I don't know if I'm being too naive because, you know, when you say giving access, you kind of have to have, you know, what's going to be the cost? People are going to be educated for that or not? Is it going to be really accessible or just for the few? Because I don't see as a fun future if we're just talking about, you know, access for the few, right? But on the same time, all the possibilities that it have of, and when it's written influence user behavior, Valentino is one of our future hackers as well. We are talking about really how we can help people managing their pain, dealing with phobias, dealing with PTSD, eating disorders, mental health issues. So we open a range of possibility, autism. You know, you don't need to be there physically and have access to this whole thing. You can use technologies that makes the body feels that you're somebody somewhere else in order to slowly being able to change your behavior on that. Also, when you talk about space exploration, you know, you can already train people out there in space in a way that it wouldn't be possible in the past, right? So those are the types of technologies that are really going to help us reach the future in a much faster pace. Now, imagine having all of this converged, right? We know that generative AI, which is, you know, it's not even a trend, it's something that everybody must learn, right? It's still on baby steps. You know that it has so much to improve. When we add it to quantum computing power, when we converge it to blockchain, to synthetic media use, so the possibilities, the amount of possibilities that we're going to have, I don't think we can process that right now, right? So it's going to be fast. We're going to be able to analyze data in a way that it's not possible today, but it's right there. It's right there. And, you know, I think that it's hard to think about all of the new things that are going to be there. And the worst part is that I think that's my phone. Okay? Please. It's me. It's time to pick my daughter at school. And that's a second one still, okay? Because I have to remind me 2 times. I know. 10 minutes. Anyway, sorry about that. And when we converge everything, so the possibilities are enormous, but still there's the concern. is that we need to upgrade our educational system now. Not now, yesterday. Like, we should have been doing that a long time ago, right? But we need to change. We need to change the way that we are educating the decision makers, legislators. It's not only about schools, it's about the companies, which are the mechanisms that we're giving within our companies. Like, what is moving people to work better? Like, is it the bonus at the end of the quarter? Or are we asking for the right things, right? So there's so much homework to do in here for us to guarantee that we're actually aiming to possible futures that are actually going to be a good place for all of us. Will you join us? Thank you so much, guys. So please, Roger, I think that we are here on the sphere. I hope that we could provoke you guys to talk to our AI. Don't forget that. All the insights that you have here, it's going to be collected to the book. Duda, if you could please introduce Roger here.
Yes.
I still had 50 seconds, so you have 50 seconds to introduce him.
So let's leave this.
Thank you.
That's 1 minute, almost 1 minute, to people to collaborate with our AI book, because we have most of you registered but no contribution. So I'll leave 1 minute, please, to make your appointments and put in the platform, please. So we have to co-create, not create ourselves and deliver to you. Okay, 1 minute, please, to put your insights. Is there any question that we would provoke people here, Maria? You think?
What are those possible futures that you see after seeing something like that? And do you see that you guys, your organization, your company, yourself, what are you working on today that you think that is going to open some doors to a better future? Or what are the challenges that you're actually facing that you'd like that we could maybe have a discussion about that in a future opportunity as well, right?
Good question, yeah. Anybody with the answer here? Don't worry.
The AI has. Ask him.
Okay, so let's introduce our... Actually, I'm not going to introduce him, but he's introducing himself. I think it's better than me doing this. So I would like to invite Roger to the stage here. And Roger, the stage is yours. Please share your ideas with us.
Thank you so much. Amazing to see so many... The mic's working? Amazing to see so many friends and familiar faces. But first, a big thank you to Future Hacker. First, they have the best name ever. I mean, how can you find a better name than Future Hacker, right? So, second of all, they invited me in 2020, September, so pretty much 4 years ago, to do a podcast. And of course, with a name like that, you can't refuse anyway. And who was I to refuse from this? And what's amazing is that the topics they were thinking about are so important and relevant, and they all kind of converge to really thinking systemically. In the end, there's a little bit of a danger of the kind of shiny object of disruption and innovation and all that, but they really think hard and deep with their podcast. I find it very thoughtful, and there are many future hackers here. I think, well, I know Cynthia and possibly Rosa and many others are future hackers, and Duda and many others. But the important thing as well is that if you think about when they started 4 years ago, I mean, you just need to take 10 seconds and you'll think about that change is a little bit of a constant, right? Because those 4 years, I mean, I won't even go through a list, it would take quite some time, but it's pretty much, on all aspects, whether it's Brazil, globally, whatever way you slice it, it changes pretty much a constant. So that's the theme. And once you've said that change is a constant, the idea is how to make sense of that a little bit better, and then how to inform decision making and what to do. You kind of need an operating system that works or not, but that kind of allows you to think about this. So I had written the Disruptive Futures Institute in my background. Actually, I'm a former investment banker, and then once I saw the light, I used to run M&A for one of the big banks and advise CEO, boards, and shareholders on their most strategic acquisitions and divestments. And these are, good jobs and, nothing to complain about. But you kind of think that these are constituents who have a good sense of what's ahead and strategy, and it's not necessarily that they don't, but what was interesting is that over the past years, I moved in 2017 from London to San Francisco, covering globally, and I was asked to reinforce the M&A team. And I just started noticing over the latter part of those years that what was keeping people up at night, CEOs or whoever, anyone for that matter, wasn't the same problematics of, what market share do I buy, or what playbooks do I follow, etc. And that sent me down a rabbit hole of being very interested in not just futures, but change, whether it's complexity or whether it's improv or what have you. And that's, after a few years of that, I basically set up the Disruptive Futures Institute with all the events we talked about over the past few years. These topics, which many of you focus on, become very important. And so this is just a continuation of that journey where I try to sort of put some thoughts together and share them. The first section is really thinking about change. I mean, change isn't new, right? The wheel was a big change. You have the meme of if you were born in 2000 and whatever, 18 or in 1915, and if you, by the time you're 30 years old, you've had 2 world wars and the biggest pandemic, and that's absolutely true. So change is not new, but I think that there's a certain amount, I think it's Yuval Harari who puts it best, sort of saying, if you look at the next 20 years, you have trouble kind of imagining, you lose kind of all the references, what happens if you study this, what are future professions? When you kind of start dissecting elements of life around values, money, professions, worth, family, governance, etc., and all of these kind of are kind of moving parts that interconnect, there's a lot happening. And from a slightly more specific perspective of companies or even individuals, the way I kind of thought about change is that basically there's an inverse relationship between predictability and uncertainty. And right or wrong, the feeling I have and the different data points that seem to suggest that there's probably a bit more uncertainty these days than there have been in the past. And so the challenge is that relying on assumptions exclusively are more dangerous and more costly. And so there's an increasing cost of relying on assumptions. So when the Fed will tell you, for instance, Yellen, oops, didn't really realize we'd have this biggest inflation for half a century. Thought I could control inflation, but I guess I can't. They have the best supercomputers in the world. They have the best statisticians in the world. So it kind of makes you think about what's happening. And the issue is not making assumptions or having models or running numbers. The issue is relying exclusively on the outcomes of that as if it was kind of pretty much determined. And that's the challenge. So what I thought about is effectively different phases of disruption. I think the first one is, many of you will be familiar with the important economist Joseph Schumpeter, and he kind of coined creative destruction. And that was slightly more kind of institutional at the level of countries after the world wars. And things get destroyed, reinvented, the developments that improve health, education, society, innovations, and all kinds of things. And that's kind of there's destruction, but it's creation as well. And then many of you will know Clayton Christensen and disruptive innovation. And that concept for me is important, but very singular and discrete. It's often related to technology or products and innovation. It's something which is understandable and replicable. You can define what is or isn't disruptive innovation in the framework of Clayton Christensen. So it's all extremely important, and I'm nobody to comment on a god of innovation like Professor Christensen, who sadly passed away a year or two ago. But the point is that it's discrete. So for him, Uber is not disruptive innovation because Uber was targeting different customer base. The same customer base as everybody asking for a taxi. It's just that maybe it was an app and maybe it was a bit cheaper, but fundamentally it's the same target audience. Netflix is disruptive innovation in that model because you're looking at It's sort of more niche, side audience, that's technology savvy, that's more cultured, or what have you, and then you sort of drive in. None of that really matters, and it's actually not the way we use disruption, because we consider Schumpeter kind of disruption 1.0, Christensen 2.0, and what we're looking at is disruption metamorphosing and changing into systemic disruption. In other words, you can no longer separate and isolate the different elements around change. It's all interconnected, it's self-reinforcing, and incidentally, it's not just negative or positive, it just is. The way you perceive it, the way you use it, the way you prepare for it will affect whether things are positive or negative. Not everything is necessarily positive or negative per se at the onset. There's an acronym which probably most of you in this room will know, which is VUCA. So it's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. How many of you think VUCA is a good description of our current environment? And if not, is there anything missing, or any thoughts on that? Priscilla? You think it's a good description? Yeah? Any other thoughts? Yeah? Yeah? Anything missing from it? What's missing? Tensions. Tensions, anxious. Okay, I know where you're going. Anything else? So the tensions. So first of all, I agree. VUCA is representative of a current environment, but I think that it needs an update. And so hopefully there's not the acronym police in the room, but we created, of course, another acronym because there aren't enough in the world. And there are 3 things that we think are missing from VUCA. But before I talk about those, the anxious that you're referring to, there was an acronym by a fellow of the Institute for the Future, James, called BANI, which many of you will know, and it's brittle, anxious, incomprehensible, and non-linear. Thank you. And all of that makes a lot of sense. A non-linear complexity is the same. And the thing I'm not crazy about personally, and huge respect for James is a very, extraordinary mind, but I just feel that the way I use it is in terms of what's our operating environment. And I prefer not to have something that is necessarily negative in the language. And anxious, and that even though it's probably true, it is loaded with negativity by definition in the language. So I think it was a fantastic representation of how individuals might feel, and especially when he coined it during the pandemic. As to whether the broader operating environment is that, but it doesn't matter. But I'm just kind of just giving a why I didn't just tag on to BANI or VUCA. But to cut it short, the things that I felt were kind of missing is we use exponential. It doesn't have to be precisely the mathematical equation of exponentiality, but from VUCA it doesn't necessarily give a sense of the velocity, the speed, or the trajectory. And I think that things feel maybe slightly, when the US military coined VUCA 50 years ago, I think the environment maybe didn't have that much speed element or nonlinearity overall for so many things. And then intersecting is an area which I feel that change arises through. I feel one knows for probably most of you in the room, change arises through intersections and things that happen on the fringe and the edge. And so the idea of putting things in silo or isolating them, things are intersecting, and that really generates change. And the thing about complexity is that, we'll see it in a minute, but most of you will know it's unknown, so you don't necessarily have an answer or playbook you can just follow, which means that the value of advice is reducing. So the value of advice is reducing, so you need your unvice, which is the opposite of advice, because you need to be more self-reliant as humanity and more resourceful as humanity than following a playbook, even if it's a great playbook from McKinsey, who managed to get a computer from jail. The way we sorry, it's just a very bad joke about McKinsey. The reason is, it's interesting when you think about governance and these things. It's a very good book by 2 journalists from the Wall Street Journal called When McKinsey Comes to Town, and they've been following many of the ways of certain of the consultancies. And if you follow the opioid crisis, and they were fined $600 million and brought to court in many countries. So it's something interesting about the way they operate, and so I'm taking the liberty. Hopefully you're not the lawyers representing McKinsey. The way we look at the drivers of change is to think about kind of the fundamentals in terms of broad underlying drivers of the change. And we categorize them in 5. The first box is new change, and it's really just thinking about the combination. We won't go through them in detail, but many of you will know about Moore's law or Wright's law. Things become cheaper or quicker the more you practice. Metcalfe's law, network effects, and the combination of these, it's not neutral. Interestingly, the laws of accelerating return is Ray Kurzweil, and so let's say you kind of read this great MIT Technology Review article saying it's the end of Moore's law. Sorry, Roger, your new change is wrong. Sure, but whether Moore's law is finishing or not, probably there might be quantum or some other technology. But in the end, it finds a way of reaching the same result or even maybe different change. The Red Queen Race is one of my favorite books, is Alice in Wonderland, and the sister book by Lewis Carroll is Through the Looking Glass. And at some point, the Queen is talking to Alice, and she's sort of saying, "Oh, my dear Alice, you're so lucky, because from where I come from, it takes all the running you can do to stay in the same place, so I need to run twice as fast to stay in the same place." And this idea is really sort of a hyper premium on relevancy, between machines and other sort of factors. All of these, you're kind of competing is a bit strong, but they kind of reduce the barriers to entry, the life cycles, etc. Incidentally, not all of this is negative. Once again, if you're a 14-year-old girl in the south of India with a $30 smartphone, probably have as much information as a Harvard professor. I'm not saying you have the same opportunities or anything, but for startup competing with the big giants or whatever it is, it also is opportunity, but it does make it harder to stay relevant, whether you're the young girl or whether you're the privileged professor, whether you're the big company or whether you're the startup or wherever you are in the world. It sort of reframes the idea of relevancy and transience of relevancy. The third category, it's hard to sort of think about how to think about things like AI or tech or whatever. And what I thought for that third cluster of driver of change is irreversibility. The feeling that the big difference with other things that happen, like for climate, if you can't live on planet Earth, it's a little bit difficult to extricate yourself from that situation. So that milestone is kind of relevant. So if this is something that is an important driver of change, which may be irreversible, you can't really put it in the same box as other ad hoc developments. And AI is the same thing. If we were to reach singularity, where computers have the same processing power, what have you, as humans, these are big milestones, so you might want to think about them before you reach them. And the fourth cluster is really thinking about systemic paradigm shifts between complexity coming to center stage, between societal shifts, whether it's generational or other aspects of society. And of course, important theme, which Maria and many of you spend time on, around disinformation and that. And then the final box is really eras that are rapidly approaching. They may not be here yet, but they probably would have a bit of an impact. What if you can live in space? So the global frontiers, whether it's new frontiers like space or other aspects. What if, the allegiances with China and different regions and the way they interact with, this is important work by Ray Dalio that was done looking at the past kind of 500,000 years as to what are the features which drive nations to rise and fall, from the Greeks to the Dutch to, and the biggest contributor is really how do the two nations that are sort of, the rising and the one that's on the top interact. And that makes a bit of a mess, because the challenger is constantly testing and pushing the limits. And when you look at history, you learn a lot about the future. So that's really where you think about all this and you put it together. You sort of think about, certainty is kind of more in the past than in the future. And even that's debatable, but probably certainty is more in the past than the future. So everything that we read, and that's why I like the work of a Future Hacker team, is because they're not just looking at kind of the trend report that normally comes out. They're looking about what are the implications and what does it mean systemically, because in the end, most of the trend reports which come out in January, those 1,000 pages, and we're all happy to get so many of these reports that we never read. But for those who do read them, we quickly realize that 80% of them are pretty much the same, and most of them is just looking at the past. Because once you can define a market, a company, a trend, an ecosystem, it's the past. So you're focusing on weak signals and a number of other factors. And so why, in the title of the book, or the subtitle, one of the words is unpredictability. And the unpredictability is important because, and again, it's not necessarily negative if you understand what it implies and you don't rely on a different environment. But risk is really, you understand the parameters, you can probabilize them, and then, it's fine. I mean, it's fine. If you drive at a certain speed, the risk of having an accident, if you decide to smoke X cigarettes a day, etc. Uncertainty, you understand the possible futures. You may not completely put a probability on them, but you have a sense. So, will China become #1 economy? Will whatever invade whatever? Now, deep uncertainty, or what people like Mark Carney, who was running the Bank of England for many years and worked a lot on these ideas, called radical uncertainty, is you don't necessarily know the states of the possible futures because they a lot. Will you live in space? What is longevity? Will you live to 200 years? Will they be quantum? Once you add all those up and think about how they interact, there's a lot going on. You can't put a probability on them. You can't put a hierarchy on them in terms of likelihood because you can't probabilize them, and there's a big list of many possible events. And even if you had a sense of what they were in terms of probability, you probably wouldn't find agreement, and you can see the polarization and the debates, and therefore if you're not finding some alignment, you're not going to find the mitigants. So that is an environment which is important because if you're relying on what comes out of your model and the risk elements, and actually you're in deep uncertainty, maybe you should be thinking slightly differently. Which is why many of us in the room, and some of the most famous ones, Rosa, who spends time with a number of the most prestigious institutions in the world around the, foresight, it's really understanding that once you have multiple unknowns, broad possibilities, no right answers, that complex environment is unpredictable, and therefore you need to think about different possibilities. Now, we kind of call that meta-ruptions. Those 5 boxes we call meta-ruptions. The idea is that it contrasts with meta-trends because disruption is constant. And so they are knowns, it's indeterminate, it's constantly novel, you need an emergent and investigative trial and error approach. There are multiple different outcomes, it's discontinuous, it's going to be surprising. It has a number of features which basically lack predictability. And we won't spend too much time on that, but when I first moved into foresight, I kind of, focused on the middle box, which is just thinking about the future. And that is, I think, personally essential. And as we discussed, the more you understand the history, probably the better you are at thinking about elements, how the future might shape. And it's not to do that for predictive purposes, it's to do that for preparation purposes about how the world might evolve. And it's quite interesting because early on I was thinking, okay, there are a lot of people in the field, extraordinarily well respected, who focus very much on emergence, on the here and now. And people like Real Miller or Dave Snowden with the Kinnavan. And this is a very important work, and they focus on kind of, only the present exists. How do you emerge in this complex environment? And it is the right question, and it is very important. But I kind of somehow felt, okay, but you still want to be thinking probably about the future, and then how do you sort of reconcile the two? And that's kind of where I thought, actually, you need the agility to constantly reconcile the longer-term vision to the emergent and the here and now, because only the present exists. And that is a specific kind of mindset. where you're recognizing the multiplicity and unknowability of the future, but kind of informing decision making today, because at the end of the day, otherwise it's just abstract, right? And you know, as I dig into the 5 volumes of Nicholas Nassim Taleb and Incerto, one of them is Anti-Fragile, and it's extraordinarily important work, anti-fragility, and that Taleb did. And he's really looking at what is the opposite of fragile? It's not resilient, because resilient is like a rubber band or an elastic. You can punch it, you can have shocks to the system. It's resilient, as the name indicates, but in the end, it doesn't change. And he coined anti-fragile in the sense that it has a way of strengthening despite the shocks, or even thanks to the shocks. So it's never surprised, because it's constantly kind of seeking things that test it and that improves it. And one example, which is quite sad but interesting and relatable, is when Russia decided to invade Ukraine, the first thing I guess a nation like that does, an invading nation, is to kind of try and disconnect communications, right? If you have no communications, you know, the invader has a bit more kind of flexibility. And incredibly, most of the world is supplied, or the Western world at least, by Viasat, which is a Californian satellite manufacturer, which is very well known, very well established. Satellites, nothing new. They've been building them for 50 years or more. I guess Sputnik was 67 or something. But anyway, but the thing about the Viasat satellites is that it took sort of 14 seconds for Moscow to deactivate them, because they have a single point of failure. And that's fragile. Single points of failure are fragile for systems. And so here comes our little Elon Musk, everybody loves to hate, and Starlink, and these little distributed satellites for crypto kids and other gamers, and from Africa to whatever remote regions, and they're not perfectly efficient, and they'll never be used by the army, and you know, just kind of the kind of things which Ornella would have done in the lab here, right? And discovery, innovation, and kicking the tires and that. But in the end, 2 years later, they haven't been able to deactivate it. If it wasn't for Starlink's system, Ukraine would have no communications. I can tell you, Ukraine would not be a country. I mean, I can tell you, I don't know. I'd have to ask Louise, actually, from Eurasia. But I'm guessing that with no communications, but the interesting thing is that suddenly China and the US, the militaries, are kind of suddenly stress testing and thinking, okay, what are our next generation of satellites? And this, you could say, well, that's resilient, it's not anti-fragile. But the funny thing about things like Starlink is that where it's anti-fragile, it's because the more you hack it and kick it and knock it and have one fall, the more the system kind of finds a way. And again, it's not saying that that will always be the case, but at present, it's kind of been anti-fragile. So this is an interesting and important thing. And so the way we use it is basically, in an unpredictable world, if you're anticipatory and understand that there are many things that can happen, if you have the agility to constantly reconcile that to informing decision-making today, because things are, by definition, constantly changing, and if you have foundations which are more resilient or anti-fragile, it's not even all. Resiliency is a prerequisite to be anti-fragile. If you're not very resilient, you cannot be anti-fragile. And so that's kind of the way we think about the world for that. And the 2 elements which we consider important is you need agency, so the kind of anticipatory, anti-fragile, and agility. You need agency, because agency is like an option, okay? If you don't exercise the option, its value is pretty much nothing. So agency is very important. You can have well-intentioned, well-capitalized, well-aligned constituents. If they aren't doing something and doing something in an effective way, it's as if they're not doing anything. And then you need somehow to find alignment despite what's in the world. I'll go quickly on what I think Ornella was seeking to apply for this job. But what I call the chief bridging officer, which is kind of reconciling all these different things, you know, the future, the present, the feedback loops, linear and complex, and really just sort of thinking that just as chief strategy officer is kind of looking quite far forward, and different functions, and everybody's firefighting emergencies. So you almost need someone who's kind of cognizant of these things and kind of constantly bridging bridging them. And likewise, the chief existential officer is acknowledging one of the important features for which anti-fragility is useful and for which complexity evokes, which is asymmetry. So you have an increasing number of small probability, low probability, but very high consequence outcomes, incidentally, both positive and negative. When OpenAI was kicking the tires with some ideas, it's you know, so it's not just negative and risk, but it's acknowledging that whether it's the level of a family unit, an individual, your career, an organization, a country, if you are not, society, pandemics, whatever it is, if you're not thinking about this low probability, very high consequence, both opportunities and risks, in a particular way, it's existential. So, having said all that, and this kind of links to my own journey and the journey of many of us, is really the moving from, okay, you're building capacity for foresight and trying to think about the future and trying to, you know, but let's say you've built that capacity for foresight and you can do some of the things we talked about. How do you actually drive change in complex systems? And what are the features of complex systems? And here, the thing about complex systems is that you can't just apply point solutions, right? In the same way as single points of failure are fragile, point solutions are ineffective in complex systems. So, you know, the best funded climate tech app that's just trying to do whatever in a way that's not thinking systemically is just, might be great and well-intentioned, but it's just not gonna work. And so here, we will not go through it in detail, but for those interested, you know, it goes back to half a century at least, if not more, the likes of Donald Adam Meadows, just thinking about, you need to apply levers to a system. They are not all equal in terms of weighting. The strongest levers are education, mindsets, mental models, what Maria was talking about with Future Hacker. But the challenge is, it's also the hardest, because it's easier to put through governance or disclosure requirements than it is to change the way you see the world. But the way you see the world will affect the outcomes in the end. And then along that, you have different things. Incentives is important, right? Incentive to determine outcomes, right? And again, coming back to Nassim Taleb, one of his absolutely key books, Skin in the Game. So it's, unless you understand systemically, there's unlikely that in our complex world, whatever you're doing, whether it's a technology, whether it's a new startup, that is going to be effective. We're going to go very quickly now because just time and that, but one of the things about complexity is you can't put things in boxes, or maybe you think you can, but they actually don't fit. And even for sectors, you know, the world, the analysts, and I spent 20 years in investment banking. I can tell you that the minute they wanted to change things, they'd put two analysts from two different sectors and think they're thinking about things in the right way. No, they're not, because I don't believe it exists. When in automotive, you have a chip manufacturer that used to be a cheap, outsourced, mass market thing that is 80% of the value of the car or an operating system. When you have new sectors or industries, when you can print a 3D heart, you know, what is a sector today? What is Apple? What is healthcare? This is just, I think, a very antiquated way of looking at the world. So the important thing for me is really to understand, and this is the problem with the trend reports you read, most of them, is that it's much easier to focus on the convergence and the intersection of things, you know, the flying cars and the space and all these things and AI on the whatever building block and next buzzword and that. That's fine. I'm not saying these are not relevant, but the point is that if we come back to why I felt intersection was missing from VUCA, in the end, it's the intersection of different things that will create new sectors. You know, if you take alternative proteins, some of which are AI platforms. What is alternative protein? Is it an AI? Is it technology? Is it food and beverage? Is it agriculture? You know, and you can do that for many sectors. And so the trick is, but this is difficult because you need that thing which is really very, very scarce called imagination. And it's easier to analyze a bunch of whatevers and look at trends and convergence and that than it is to actually imagine actually what is at stake, where might things go. And there's a reason we miss the inflection. There's a reason why we miss all these things, is because you have the combination of exponentiality. Growth is very small at the beginning, you don't notice it, and then suddenly, whoop, that's fine. But it's combined with Amara's law, which is treacherous, because Amara's law is that you tend to overestimate something at the beginning, but underestimate it afterwards. So it's all a lot of hype and metaverse, and therefore, oh, then you ignore it. The problem is that people are too obsessed with that trend report and what metaverse and what year and what this, instead of just thinking, it's just immersion, it's just virtualization, it's just a direction. Yes, it's a bit hyped. Doesn't mean that those fundamental drivers will not continue and intersect. And so when you kind of overhype, ignore it, don't notice the exponential because it's not discernible, the combination of the two means that you're missing the breakthroughs which come from the intersection across different ideas, fields, and other things. The focus on AI, I'm just absolutely just going to give a tease on it, but it's really to say the following. You would have guessed from now, if you don't already know, that complicated is linear. You can understand the cause and effect in a preemptive manner, ex ante manner. You have a range of right answers. You have known unknowns. It's science. It's how do you send a probe to Mars, etc. Complexity, you can only establish ex post what the result is. It's emergent. It's unknown unknowns. It's non-linear. It's trial and error. And therefore, there's no playbook. And therefore, there's no consultant. That's the advice. There's no consultant. There's no 30-year experience that is going to help you. Nothing. So therefore, and it's not that all of the world is that, but for some elements at some point in time which have complex features, it's unpredictable. And again, it's not a problem unless you're applying the playbooks of the complicated. Now, the challenge is that computers are good with linear and complicated. Basically, they're not better than us and shouldn't be with complex, because pattern recognition doesn't help with unpredictable multiple drivers that are dynamic and changing every 10 seconds. So when you're looking at existentialism, which is agency, choice, and freedom, in the 21st century, existence is existence in a technological world, and you don't have exclusivity on decision making. And if you are delegating to machines decision making for complex matters, humanity is descaling. Not only are machines learning fast, but humanity is actually descaling. And given that the collapse of societies, for those who studied it, and who are much more knowledgeable than I am, is often linked to humanity's inability to extricate itself and problem solve itself out of the most complex challenges, well, guess what? LLMs might not be able to either. So the danger is really understanding the nuances of what it means for AI. We won't go through this now, but effectively, no prizes for guessing that the false dichotomies of human extinction or utopia is probably missing a range of considerations that we should be thinking about around AI, not least reinventing or reframing the educational system and many other things. We wrap it up by basically the following. We have our own disruptive thinking canvas, and if you buy this book, all your dreams will come true. And if you leave an Amazon review, all the dreams of the people you love and care most for will become true. And it's guaranteed. And it's thanks to this canvas. Joke aside, these are important topics, and whether it's from the book or from your own work or whatever it is, they revolve more around some of these 6 I's than around number crunching, as you might have guessed. They revolve around feedback loops, because whatever you do at any point, the key thing is that things are constantly changing, so you need to constantly understand the indeterminacy of the world. It's not a bad thing. There's wonderful things about this. Some of our civilizations have understood for thousands of years, Zen Buddhism and other things, the importance of beginner's mind and shoshin and impermanence. It's actually fine The only problem is if your educational systems, your incentive structures, your governance structures are teaching you for a complicated world which is predictable, determined, and a playbook, then you have a problem. As long as you embrace certain things, you'll have a different perspective. If you see the world differently, you'll prepare differently. If you prepare differently, you'll have a different way of responding and timing of responding to the things you're missing out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you very much for sharing this amazing content and knowledge. And now we're gonna switch to our move to our roundtable. But before, we're gonna have some information regarding the AI book. Sorry, I have to. Thank you for contributing. We received a lot of contributions. So there is actually a provocative PowerPoint slide from Roger that I would like to ask you and to see if someone wants to jump in and collaborate in our AI book, which is every company needs to be an energy company. This is a snapshot from the Roger Spitz. Of course, he speaks a lot more content here, but what do you think about it? What do you think about energy? Is that so critical for us? I think so, but what's your opinion? Every company needs to be an energy company. Every company needs to be an energy company. Yeah. Energy company. Energy. No. This is from the AI book. This is from for the AI book.
I'm not sure, but is everybody familiar with the Kardashev scale? Has everybody ever heard of the Kardashev scale? Have you ever heard of the Kardashev scale?
No. Can you explain, please?
This is how they measure the level of evolution of an entire civilization. So the level 1, 2, and 3, and it's basically energy. So Kardashev scale is you use energy from your own planet, which is what we are unfortunately doing. Level 2, you use it from your own star. And level 3, you become multi-star and thus independent. So I think it's not only organizations, I think everybody has to wonder how we become a social, a Kardashev society, really.
This is a great point, yeah. Okay, let's go to our round table, and I would like to invite again Roger to be with us. I would like to invite Ornella, which will be the moderator of this round table, and Maria to join us here on the stage.
Thank you. And just to please come here. I have heard some people here have some questions. So in order not to skip the dynamic, we can start with some questions because I think that they are especially for you. So I think we can do that. And then we say, no, thank you.
Sorry, guys, it's me again. Thanks for that. It was really, really, really good, Roger. But having listened to you and everything you've said, I think the rationale is perfect. But the situation which you think, which you posit that there will be no problem if we change the mindset is exactly what we're living. Mindsets are not changing. We are trying to solve complex situations with complicated models. And I think we're seeing a systemic breakdown. So how do we implement this? Because I've been trying to do it at organizational level, and the culture shift is just too big.
Yeah. Sorry if I kind of took a shortcut. I wasn't suggesting for a minute that these were just a quick fix. And what I meant to say is the fundamental environment that is unpredictable is not necessarily new or problematic per se. The challenge, I personally believe, is if you don't change the educational system, governance structures and incentive structures to give you an operating system for humanity that understands that our context is unbiased or complex or whatever, or bunny or whatever we want to call it, that's when we have a problem. And to my first slide, I think that if you look at 2008 or some other catastrophes, or when the Donella team first wrote Limits of Growth 50 years ago, Why did it not matter? Because 50 years ago they wrote the limits of growth, but people ignored it, but you didn't have, it wasn't concrete enough, so you could have oil and gas and other industries and interests that kind of crushed these incredible warning signs. The problem now is that it's tangible, and so are other developments. And when you put them all together and you're ignoring all of them, it's a little bit crunch time. And to come to the irreversibility and the non-linearity, that crunch time can hit at any time in a way that's irreversible. So the stakes, I think, are kind of a slightly higher, meaning the increasing cost of relying on the assumptions of a stable, linear, and predictable world. So what I was trying to posit is there are ways of adapting, and it's not that we should be scared about unpredictability or complexity per se. We should be scared about humanity's lack of willingness and ability to exercise agency to adapt to an operating system which would allow it to be sustainable for the future.
So thank you. Now we are going to go to the round table.
Nice.
So I will be asking the questions, so you should be in the middle. Okay. So thank you. Now the idea is, as we mentioned, right, is to do a little bit of connections. It will take a lot of time. We have 20 minutes, so it's quite ambitious. To do some connections between what we have spoken today, and of course feel free to make your comments. And since we are working here with this topic here at ONONO at BASF, and we have already some inputs, we are going to try to mix everything together, and my questions will have a little bias on that. But the point is that we talked about the new points and the new nature of this disruption. I was going to ask why, but you mentioned very clearly that it's this meta-ruption. So if we would like to put some connections, I would like to ask you on the convergence and boundaries merging, right? When we think that these industries and sectors do seem not to have so many boundaries, how can we adapt our evaluation methods in order to navigate this hybrid and liminal future?
Yeah, well, I should be asking you the question because you're running an innovation lab and doing that triage for one of the most successful companies in the world. But I'll do my.
It's quite a challenge. That's why I asked you the experts.
For sure. No, but I think what we're saying, I guess, is that whatever playbooks or corporate venture capital or whatever things exist and people replicate, and basically you got to ask yourself whether you can replicate those kind of things. So when you're then thinking about what we're saying, in the end, it's simple and difficult. The simple part is that you're looking for things that are different, that are on the margin. You're having to pay attention to more things. You're having to connect things in ways. So if you're organized or triaging with experts and things that are siloed or whatever, not connecting them, then you'll miss it. If you're kind of dismissing hype and at the same time not noticing the weak signals, you then fall to the inflection paradox and you miss things. So it does require a different kind of early warning systems and different kind of ecosystem interactions, and it is more emergent. And that is difficult and harder than playbooks. That's why we teach playbooks at school, and that's why McKinsey writes playbooks from jail. But in the end, that's really the challenge, I guess. But I would say that it's harder to achieve that if you're not aware of it and seeking to consider what are the features and options in a complex environment. You're not even going to be able to, because you're not even making sense or realizing the environment you're in, and therefore you're unlikely to make decisions that relate to that environment. So I'd say it's challenging, but there's a starting point, which is to be cognizant of it and to understand the features of it, and there are ways of making sense of that environment, as many of us do, but it's not a playbook.
If I may, one comment. And I know your name is it's Oliver, right? Oliver.
Don't go away.
Spacho. I just was thinking about his provocation, if I may, first, and I feel the pain. I feel that we all feel this pain, right? We are here, we're listening to this great content here from Roger, but we still like I feel it. How can we change it? How can we do it? How can we apply it, right? And I've been learning. I'm lucky because we say that we're interviewing people. We are learning. You know, we're just doing this
Me too, us
free
too.
free PhD with you guys, right?
It goes both ways, but yeah.
I've been learning with Roger for so long. He's been talking about since the very beginning, Roger, regarding those right incentives. This term always resonated with me, right? Because I think at the end is about having the right incentives. And that this provocation that I did before about are we still just thinking about the last of the end, the Q3, the Q4, like if you're just thinking about how we're ending the month, how we're ending this quarter, everything that Roger is talking about is not going to be there. It's going to be here in this lecture, and then we leave, and then again, you know, we're almost end of the quarter, and then next quarter, and then next quarter. So how can we actually establish from the very top those right incentives so people have the freedom and people have the time? Because many people, they already have the will, right? But we need something else to motivate people to start doing more. And I think it's also said a little, right? Because we shouldn't need to have the incentive. Like it should come from us, but I think it's a little utopic to say that as well. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, and linked to also climate, it's also, you know, what is the responsibility of big corporates, humanity, versus putting the onus on individuals. But I won't put the spotlight on Ornella or her amazing organization, but there was a company I was speaking at earlier this week, and I was asking them about incentives because of how important it is. And it was an innovation lab like yours, or completely different sector. And I said, so what are your incentives? And because it's a very important point, incentives determine outcomes, okay? And they said, well, basically, what are the top 5 incentives you'd imagine we have? So I said, I don't know, number of startups you see, number of projects, blah, blah, blah. You know, and they said, well, we don't have any of those. Because basically, we're interested in outcomes, we're interested in, and they kind of talked about some of the features, and basically they were not the kind of, and I'm not saying you have them and you don't need to disclose them, but I'm just saying that it is really so true and so important. Once you're thinking about outcomes and no longer probabilizing or just slicing or whatever, you know, because the thing about incentives, not only do they determine outcomes, but they also rest on an important assumption, which is if those KPIs or incentives or whatever are achieved, that equals success. But success is relevancy and sustainable futures in different ways. And that is a big assumption to assume that whatever 4 numbers are determining your relevancy and sustainable futures.
Many things on our heads, but it's not only about incentives, but then also showing the results of what are the outcomes through that incentives, right?
Exactly.
Because otherwise it's like, okay, it ends in an incentive and you don't make necessarily the connections.
Yeah.
So I think it should be like a virtuous circle.
No, 100%. It's exactly that. Yeah, the outcomes.
And yesterday we were here at an event that somebody said, it's not my quote, but that when you see that, it can't be unseen anymore. And I think that everything that you mentioned is that regard. Now we have seen it. Now we can't go back, and we need to keep building on that. And you mentioned also about the collaboration and the needs of working together to navigate these scenarios. How do you recommend like an actionable point in order to break these silos and consider this in a more actionable way?
So I'd love to hear also Maria's view on that. You're asking me, so I'll just shoot first if that was your intention. I think coming back to maybe incentives and, you know, substance versus form and that, I think one of the topics around diversity and equity and that has been kind of hijacked in a way that is making it polarized and problematic for many reasons, which are too complex to unpack here. But if you just go back to some of the things we discussed, and this is where you'll see where I'm going, the difference between complicated and complex, right? Complex, it's emergent, there are no right answers, it's a discovery process, it's trial and error. You basically, what does that mean, said differently? And this is not me, it's a very important professor, and I think he was dean of the Santa Fe Institute, called Professor Page. And when he talks about complexity and complex system and emergence, he basically considers that diversity is essential because lack of diversity is effectively you're using a playbook. You're treating things as if they were knowable at that or known at that point and linear. Whereas if you're thinking that they're complex and unpredictable and emergent, you realize that not only do you need diverse views to come up with something new because you don't have a pre-cooked answer, but whatever you come up with as something new will also have a dynamic and be in flux and potentially change. And so once you've said that, basically, it shifts the debate around diversity to it being a survival for relevancy in a complex world, because you are not going to solve complex problems which don't have pre-cut resolutions without bringing in different perspectives and different views and collaborations and different ecosystems and working, I'm sure it's the case with yourselves as well, with what would normally be competitors or with companies that seem unrelated or with groups of individuals or constituents that just would not be on your radar. And that's, again, the problem with trend reports, with the, looking at what you see as your direct ecosystem. So for me, it's a fundamental ingredient to emergent and potential resolution of complex challenges.
I absolutely love that. And I was thinking that somehow the discussion around diversity ends up in a place in such in this simplificado. I'm missing this word. Simplified, yes. Way of gender and age, right? And it's so beyond that when we talk about diversity, and it's so beyond the quotes, right? That at least we have here in Brazil, and like the truth, diversity. We talk about different cultures. That's really hard to see here in Brazil, especially, right? It's about different backgrounds. How many? Like, what's the percentage of job descriptions that we see that it's if it's a position in IT, you have to have experience in IT. If it's a position in sales, you have to have experience. Like, we're still so addicted to having the same and hiring the same and have people like us with the same experiences. And the thing is that the short circuit that happens, like the spark happens, when we're hearing things that we're not used to hear.
Yeah.
With views that are completely different than ours, right? And that's the truth diversity. Like, it's putting different people here together, it's having this discussion, it's having you guys also giving, like, it's this collective intelligence here, right? And the thing is that when it comes to a company, it's not just about checking the box hired, right? It's like, does this person still have the place to speak? And the environment needed? And the resources needed is not just checking the box. So it's hard, and the will needs to be there, and the right motive needs to be there. Because when you actually make it happen, that's how the magic happens, right?
Yeah, it's intersectionality, right?
Yeah.
We talk about that, and keeping very clear on the potential challenge that we are working on, and also giving everybody a seat on the table, right? In order to be able to do it with the right incentives. And coming to another point, you mentioned that everything that we're facing is beyond complicated, and that can sound a little scary, at least for me. Beyond complicated, it sounds quite scary. So I would like to ask about what are our foundations, if we can feel safe about something, but it's not changing.
Yeah, so I think in the end, it's a cultural thing as well, right? If you take Heraclitus, and he's, more than 50 years old, so it's not recent stuff that waited for AI or computers. You never put your foot in the same water twice, because the water has moved, and so has your foot and your body changed. And if you think of some of the traditional, Buddha and other Indian philosophies and that, this idea of the water flowing and change being constant and transience, which we call, Mujo. And in Eastern philosophy and Zen Buddhism, in the end, if you are brought up, it comes back to the Newtonian mechanical educational system, which is very important and brought us, longevity and drug discovery, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is if it's 100% of the education and the mindsets and what you're used to in a world which is more and more other features of complexity, then you have the gap because you're clinging on to stable, predictable, linear, and then things are different, so you're noticing that discrepancy and that change, but actually maybe that's not a problem per se. The problem is that you're noticing variances. But if you're used to falling and stumbling or thinking of different cultures and that, that's point number one. Point number two is, in reality, once you say disruption is a constant, there's no disruption. It's just constantly flowing. So actually there's no change. So you are anchored. If you believe that the environment is unwise, then you notice change, but it's actually fine. You're anchored to understanding the environment is unwise. If you understand that computers are continuing to learn, they're evolving, but you're anchored to understanding that, and then you're anchored to understanding that maybe we need to change the fact that computers are continuing to learn, and then that information is playing an increasing role, which is dual, which is good and bad and dangerous. So for me, the anchorage is not anchoring to false assumptions which are obsolete, but anchoring to things that you understand, this duality and transience.
You ask what will not change. For me, the scary part is to hear that it's not changing.
Okay.
Yes.
We need change. We need change, right? And the thing is that what I like about your question, and I was thinking earlier when I was going through your resources, Roger, is that maybe the hard part about implementing changes in companies is because it's more when you talk about boards of directors, for example, it's usually seen as a risk. Like when you want to talk about innovation, it gets in the agenda when it's a risk. But we need to start seeing also as opportunities, right? And the reason risk is always in front of that is because it speaks higher when you're talking about finance and survival, which is the big mission of the boards of directors, like to keep the company surviving, right? So then it's the risk of. But when we see the opportunities out there and see as new investments and new revenue streams and new possibilities, but you still need the right incentives to make a longer term. Again, we can't fantasize that. We can't say, okay, it's an opportunity, it's for now. It's not going to be for now, right? But the impact, it will be. The risk is immediate. But and then you have that. Then it's scary because it's a risk, because it's changing, because I won't have my job in the future. I think we need a change of mindset, of being scared of not seeing the possible changes ahead of us.
And I think that's a good provocation for everybody. I think everybody works with
Cynthia wants to
innovation
make
or connected to innovation, that we need to take that as professionals, but also as humans. It will be much more successful, our journey and our impact on change. I have some questions here, but I think that there are some questions in the audience, and also please send them through the chat. So I'm going to skip here and give the mic for you, right?
Thank you. I'm Cynthia, and we've been talking a lot about this challenge since we met many years ago in Silicon Valley. And as we are talking here about the challenges for the companies, I would like to ask you about public policies. Is there any country or at least a city that you see that is creating good public policies to deal with this complex world, and not just with the complicated, because we didn't even make it with the complicated. We need some hope here, Roger. Help us.
So I'll give an answer, then Marie might have perspective as well. So the first thing I would say is, I didn't mention it as an intro, those who know me know it, but I'm connected to Brazil. I should speak better than a gringo, I don't, but my wife's a carioca, but she's great. And I've been coming here for 20 years, and I have some sense of the country. And unrelated to all that, I was actually very pleasantly surprised because the Chamber of Deputies in Brasilia actually asked me to give a talk and a testimonials on how I see the needs of changing education in our complex world. Well, they didn't use those terms, but effectively it was that. So even though it's messy and I understand the problems of Brazil and many other countries, one or two people are thinking about these things. To answer your questions more directly, I'd say I'm one of the advisors of the World Economic Forum, the Global Foresight Network, and we did a 2-day retreat which had all kinds of institutions and countries. And what was interesting is that you had Finland and Singapore who have a foresight capability that reports directly to the Prime Minister's office, which informs policy. They don't have a right of veto, etc., but it's interesting nonetheless. And I think that helps a lot. Some countries like Canada have it, but it's a separate unit and a capability. It doesn't necessarily inform policy. But I would say nonetheless, it's still challenging because Singapore, however amazing it is in ways, and I know it's a dictatorship and terrible, but the degrees of dictatorships, I think we've all realized in the world, and Singapore is probably not the worst. And maybe today with the challenge of democracy, maybe it's not a bad thing to be a Singapore. But Singapore, you know, even how clever and agile and forward-thinking they are, it's still harder to implement certain things than that are complex and complicated. But to give you an idea, I think they're giving free scholarships and education for everybody above 35 or 40. They have certain perspective on workerism, which you might look at and think, what terrible people, and they're not being equitable, and no wonder they treat blah, blah, blah. But actually, when you unpack it and look at what it means for the dynamics, for the incentives, for innovation, you realize that it's not that they're not looking for fairness and equity and better distribution and that, but that they understand that politicized, antagonized, and hijacked language and stuff isn't achieving certain objectives. So I think those are the countries to look at. And Finland, we know, is one of the best education systems, and you love and spend a lot of time on that, Cynthia, of course. And we know that also it's one of the happiest countries for the third year in a row, apparently. So for a country where it's dark at 3 p.m., it's even worse than London. They're doing well, you know?
I was going to mention Finland as well, but it's funny because they're probably the size of a neighborhood here or something.
That's
right?
the thing. Yeah.
But what I don't know, maybe you do, is the and my guess, not based on any data at all, is that for sure we need more diversity on the public sector. To begin with, more women, right? And would you know that in Finland, if they have like more?
I think it's very balanced.
It's balanced,
actually.
right?
And incidentally, the global foresight person who was at the retreat was a woman.
Yes. So definitely, I would begin by that, like a better, really, a mirror of the population, because at the end, the balance is right there, right? So we need more people knowing how to represent us. This automatically will at least improve the public policies as well.
Thank you.
I think Oliver.
Yeah, I think we're running out of time, but let's do the last one, just the last one, quite quick, and then we can keep talking here.
So, I think we're talking about a really important thing about risk. So define risk. Yeah, and you're right. So 70% of transformations are failing. Okay, that's the statistic. Actually, 17 between 90. That's insane. That's startup level failure for corporates. That's crazy. And that's happening because the C-level isn't incentivized. They're all budget driven, so it's profit down the line. And the board has no idea of what innovation is about. They are dealing with risks, which are much more financial, which was the reality, and it's real, right? I mean, 20, 30 years ago, that's what, but we need an entire new generation of boards. That's why Go New, I think, is such an important initiative of ours. But so I think it's really interesting that you bring this up, because we need to redefine what risk means. It's much more these things here. Yeah. Plus, also understand that we can't foresee everything. I was going to ask Roger how he reconciles with anti-fragility, because anti-fragility, by definition, means you can't see the future, which means you have to work on the system. You have to be more adaptable. So it's just a general comment in terms of what you were saying.
Comment, super insight.
So, do you want to comment something regarding changing the boards? I think it's like quite an opinion, but it's important. We need to do these changes, but we need to be optimistic that we don't need to change the board in order to make this happen, because sometimes it won't happen, right? The boards are still here, and we need to be engaging enough, showing what we are doing, trying to do some tests in some spaces in order to show the value. And of course, with that, we are going to make the change, or at least like try to find some anchor of support within the organizations, because otherwise it's quite like hopeless, right? To think that. Yep. He just for the audience, he's just saying that it's a matter of scale, and I think we totally agree, but we can't miss the point that we still have hope, to keep our hope in what we have today. And to finalize, I don't know if you want to share some final comments. Maria, please.
So just not to miss your provocation around boards. So we've been studying boards for a while. Also, Roger is close to this world as well. And I think that the pressure is there. And you see that in GoNew, you see that in IBGC. They are talking about it, there is this pressure. And the thing is that the pressure is coming from the market, naturally. So the market, and you see, if you see like the B3, and also, so the pressure is from outside, as usually it is. And there's these movements of get younger people, getting it more diverse as well. So it's happening, not in the space that we would like to, right? But it is happening. And I also get Ornella's point, is because we also don't need to be waiting for this change to happen from above. And it's something, as we are talking about culture, it needs to be in all levels, right? But I think that the final message, and speaking as a future hacker, you know, we began 4 years ago. We had this dark image, our brand was all black, and we had this, and then we realized that's not the future that we want, you know. We have to have more colors in there, we have to have more possibilities, we have to have more desirable futures out there. And that's what we preach, you know. We believe that we need to be educating, we need to be collaborating, we need to be connecting, we need to be exchanging information. That's our NDA. And we really hope that this is just one provocation, but that it just keeps happening, and you know, and we need to get there, we need to discuss, we need to talk about the hard things, but not just to talk about. We need to start seeing things and exchanging information as well. Roger?
Maybe just, I have a mic. Maybe just quick comment on the boards and wrap up. On the boards, I mean, I agree with you. Then it's what has changed. Is it replacing an entire board or just kind of starting to? But just for the anecdote, and IBGC, I've been known for quite a few years, and they've been asking me to give talks and that. I would say that, in fact, I was giving a big talk yesterday. They had a reasonable number of people, I think close to 100, and we're discussing also different potential programs. And so I would say that the difference between what on earth does this guy do, but it sounds vaguely intriguing, to, oh, this unpredictability thing, do you actually kind of unpack it? And, you know, so I think there is that. The Institute of Directors in India also asking me to do a keynote and potential program in the big event around these topics in London. So I'm not saying it you know, but still, it's better than not thinking about these topics. And whether it's me or others, who cares? But the idea is they're thinking about these things as being important, as opposed to just the risk and the best practice and the compliance and regulation. Just a closing comment is, I actually am positive about the capabilities of humanity. I am an existentialist at heart. I believe we have agency, freedom, and choice. And tech essentialism for me is not just a kind of gimmick. It's really a thing about understanding how we exercise that agency in the technological world and with some of the things we've talked about. And I think we can. The trick is indeed, and I think Maria phrased it beautifully, which is what scares me is the status quo or something like that, is that we don't exercise that agency. And that is a risk because we're seeing it. And I think that's a bigger risk than dealing with the constituents that are always going to be just baddies and have bad intentions, and that's fine. There are always going to be countries, organizations, and money that flows that way. But I think the biggest risk is really the lack of agency as humanity for different reasons. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Maria, all the team of Future Hacker, everybody here. You can keep talking in the audience as well. Thank you for sharing. And the invite is open, as we started saying that here we are a collaboration, a co-creation space. These conversations need to keep on. It's not only having us with this content sharing. Please count on us, yeah, to have these conversations here, and it's not the first one of many others.
Thank you very much for hosting. Thank you, Ornella.
BASF. We create chemistry.
Future Hacker. Life. path, future.